And there's just too much money sitting on the sidelines when it should be back in the productive private sector. And so I think we should be correcting this misguided approach. And I'm proud of the 19 Republicans who voted against it. This budget was not conservative. It was a progressive budget, more California style than anything else. Hello, welcome to this week's Economy. I'm your host, Dr. Vance Ginn. Thank you for joining me again today. Remember, you can find all the show notes and watch the videos and much more at my Substack newsletter, vanceginn.substack.com. You can find a lot of other information at vanceginn.com as well. Book me on your podcast, do TV interviews, coming to speak at your wherever you have your events. Glad to do those things. So we've got a lot to talk about, though. So let's get right into it today. We've got not only did, unfortunately, Texas passed a Texas-sized budget that was more California style than it was Texas style. Passed the Texas House, will soon go to conference committee. Well, then it will go to Governor Abbott's desk. So we've got a process that will still take place. They still spend too much. I'm going to talk about that. And then meanwhile, across the nation, Americans are feeling the effects of more uncertainty, more of the deals of trade agreements, tax, are the tax cuts going to be permanent at the end of the year? The House passed their budget as well, the U.S., at least a reconciliation package to say, okay, here's the next steps in that direction. So I'm going to get into some of those things, but let's jump into it, all right? Number one, tariff market impacts. In the news, extreme volatility in global stock markets has been triggered by President Trump's new tariffs. Trump downplayed concerns, calling the tariffs, quote unquote, medicine to address long-term standing trade deficits with other countries. With more than tariff threats looming, prices for consumer products are expected to rise, potentially leading to job losses and economic uncertainty, particularly in industries dependent on global supply chains. In response, several House Republicans are considering backing Representative Don Bacon's bill, which will limit the president's authority to impose tariffs unilaterally and require tariffs to expire after 60 days unless approved by Congress. My take on this is, what can Congress do? They should be taking a stand on their budgetary powers of spending and taxes. Tariffs are a tax on Americans. Therefore, there should be less leeway for a president to make those decisions, especially with as much uncertainty. One day off, one day on. One day it's going to happen April 2nd, and they do a 90-day pause on many of them to leave 10% of tariffs across all countries, even countries that don't have little to no tariffs on us. Like places like Australia, Singapore, there's a whole bunch you can go through there. I think there were about 60 other countries that had lower tariff barriers than the 10% we were trying to impose on them. This also makes the highest tariff rate of 10%. Before this, we were at 1.6% just a few days, just last week before all these went into place. So we're more than 5 times higher in taxes, an average tariff on goods coming in from other countries. And there's more than 120% tax just on China. So all the items that are imported from China, whether they be intermediate goods for producers or final goods for consumers, those will likely go up dramatically here pretty soon if these tariff rates remain in place. This is a huge cost for Americans, especially lower income Americans. And while we may not all like the Chinese products or whatever else, you got to remember that Walmart sells a lot of Chinese products. Other places do too. And that's oftentimes where lower income people are buying things. If those prices keep going up and people can't buy them, that means Walmart also has to fire workers who are usually lower income workers. So not only get fewer people working, but you also get not the products that people want to buy. And this is one reason why I really think that instead we should be looking at trade deals, not trade wars, where trade is not a weapon. The tool of tariffs should not be a weapon. We should be thinking about diplomacy, talking with folks, trying to bring them down to lower tariff rates or something else on their people. That way we can export more to them. But we got to remember, our tariffs on Americans is putting Americans last because it's raising taxes on them and not reducing other taxes. And in particular, I don't think tariffs are a good tax anyway. We should not be a protectionist country. We've left that so many years ago. We should be more moving to freer trade, especially with our allies, cutting taxes, cutting spending, and all that good stuff. We'll be in a much better situation. That's why I'm kind of glad that we saw what we did with the Senate and the House and U.S. Congress, at least finding $1.5 trillion, hopefully, in spending cuts. And there's some amount of revenue that's coming. And what I hope that doesn't happen is they cut spending or cut taxes and extend the Trump tax cuts and don't find spending restraint and relief. Remember, I've talked about passing budgets that have increased no more than population growth plus inflation. You do that and have 1 percentage point more in GDP growth from deregulation and tax cuts and things of that nature and cutting spending. Those are pro-growth policies. We can see the budget balance in about 5 or 6 years at the federal level. So we've got a lot of work to do. So let's keep going on that. Number two, Texas-sized budget, California-style spending. In the news, the 2026-27 Texas proposed biennial budget was narrowly approved. Well, actually, mostly approved. There were 26 House members who voted against the budget out of 150, 19 Republicans, 7 Democrats. And as you might expect, the Republicans that voted against it were saying, look, this is too much spending. We shouldn't have this in there. And let's vote against it. The 7 Democrats were more upset about the $1 billion worth of school choice, which is still too little. They're spending $100 billion on the public education, the government school system. And this budget is still well above population growth plus inflation. When you look at the last couple of sessions, we have a biennial budget in Texas. And so I think there's too much expansion of government. It unchecks government bloat. Even with the $24 billion surplus, there's only $6 billion going to property tax relief. There's still $28 billion in the rainy day fund. And there's just too much money sitting on the sidelines when it should be back in the productive private sector. And so I think we should be correcting this misguided approach. And I'm proud of the 19 Republicans who voted against it because this budget was not conservative. It was a progressive budget, more California style than anything else. And it's actually putting Texas in a worse situation later on for passing sustainable budgets. We've got to get things back in order in Texas. I'm sorry to see that this happened this time, but maybe there's steps in the right direction that we could take the hereafter. All right. Number 3, jobs outlook. In the news, despite federal government layoffs and rising concerns over extensive import tariffs, March saw an unexpected surge in hiring. Employers added 228,000 jobs. My take on this is that we need to take a deeper look at employment. Much of March's job gains came from government-subsidized sectors like healthcare, social assistance, and transportation. This isn't necessarily a sign of booming private economy, as core sectors like manufacturing, mining, and construction saw little to no growth. Wages and participation, what happened there? Well, average hourly earnings rose just 0.3% in March, but real earnings are still down. When you look at weekly average earnings, adjusted for inflation, are down 2.6% since Biden took office in January of 2021. So this is why people keep falling behind. They feel like they can't keep up with what's going on. Inflation just continues to be a part of that. So it's time to get a healthy economy again. We get rid of these tariffs. We cut spending. We cut taxes. We extend the Trump tax cuts and start allowing for people to decide what's going to be best for their future versus politicians and bureaucrats. Okay. Number 4, Kansas vetoes sandbox legislation. In the news, Kansas Governor Laura Kelly vetoed House Bill 2291, which aimed to create a regulatory relief division within the Attorney General's office and establish an advisory committee to support new businesses and entrepreneurs. This would have been a great opportunity for these sandboxes to allow for more entrepreneurs. Right now, there's been a loss of entrepreneurs, especially with Governor Kelly vetoing this bill. There's going to be less opportunity for them to foster growth. And the governor is trying to maintain the status quo. And really what you need is a situation where you can deregulate and allow for innovation to take place. My only concern with sandboxes is that, there's still more risk because what happens whenever those laboratories of competition, if you will, or those situations where you allow for deregulation to happen and certain instances to move forward, what happens when that goes away? That brings about uncertainty. And so it'd be nice, though, I think, is at least get the process started. And when you start seeing the innovation that takes place, then you can do that more broadly across the state. So I think that would be a good situation. But I'm hopeful as Kansas will override this veto. Kansas also passed a bill that will provide tax relief and using spending restraint, provide lower taxes over time. So they're moving in a better direction in that situation. There's also been some spending restraint. And again, Governor Kelly, she vetoed that tax relief bill, but it was overridden by the House and the Senate. And so that's a good thing. There's a veto-proof margin here now. And so this will be law, and Kansas will have a better situation there. It's great work going on by the Kansas Policy Institute, where I do some work. Keep that going. Number 5, executive order to boost coal. In the news, President Trump recently signed executive orders aimed at boosting U.S. coal production and preserving coal plants facing closure. The order also directs Energy Secretary Chris Wright, who's been doing a great job, to consider designating coal used in steel production as quote-unquote critical mineral, which would unlock emergency powers to increase output. This initiative comes in response to rising U.S. electricity demand driven by energy-intensive technologies. My take is we need to make energy independent again, make the U.S. energy independent again. This happens by allowing for freeing up, reducing regulations. We had $1.8 trillion in new regulations, much of that on the energy sector through the green energy agenda of the Inflation Reduction Act and more things by the Biden administration. But we also need more energy moves. We need to allow for more permitting. We should be selling federal land, allowing for more drilling on federal land and things of that nature, but also getting government out of the way. getting rid of the Inflation Reduction Act. There's some talk about keeping that in place. That's just ridiculous. It's a massive, over $1 trillion in energy subsidies, mostly to unreliable wind and solar. It should end. That would help with some of the costs of the increase in spending in other places, while also putting us in a better situation with this reconciliation bill that we talked about earlier. And so I think if we have more of these sort of free market policy benefits, we can embrace more, creating more energy, more jobs, and enhancing national security to really get the AI abundance, technology abundance, and energy abundance, and just prosperity abundance overall for more people to prosper. And I think if we're moving more in that direction, we'll be in a much better situation now and in the future, and allowing for us to have more prosperity. I think all these things, when you start combining it together, indicates the need for less government spending. That is the ultimate burden in our lives. And then we can reduce taxes, get rid of regulations, and reduce the federal bureaucracy and bureaucracy in state and local governments too. Remember, many greater, better things are happening at the state and local level compared to the federal level. So that's really where a lot of this is going. And so I hope that you've enjoyed our discussion today. Please share this with your friends and family, and go and get more information at vanceginn.com, or get my show notes and watch the video and much more at vanceginn.substack.com, or wherever you get your platform. Go ahead and subscribe today. I appreciate that. God bless you, and let people prosper.